Nobody saw this coming. At just 45 years old, Pastor Tim Rogers, a beacon of faith and inspiration to millions, found himself at the epicenter of a scandal that threatened to shatter everything he held dear. He's finally broken his silence about the tragic rumors surrounding the death of his beloved wife. What he revealed left the entire church community, and fans around the world, completely speechless. If you thought you knew the whole story, think again. Stay tuned because what you're about to hear will change everything you thought you knew about Pastor Tim Rogers and his heartbreaking journey. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most heartbreaking and controversial stories to hit the gospel world. Pastor Tim Rogers, a man known for his powerful sermons, soulful singing, and inspiring presence, has finally decided to address the swirling rumors and unanswered questions surrounding the tragic death of his wife. For years, whispers have floated around about what really happened, about what was being hidden, and why Pastor Rogers chose to remain silent for so long. Some called it a private pain. Others suspected a deeper story that needed to be told. In this video, we're not just scratching the surface. We're unpacking the emotional truth behind Pastor Tim Rogers' journey through unimaginable loss, the pressure from his congregation and the public, the speculations that refuse to die down, and, finally, his decision to speak out. You'll hear everything: the timeline of events, the shocking allegations, and, most importantly, what Pastor Tim himself has now confirmed. So, grab a seat because this story is full of emotional twists, unexpected turns, and revelations that will leave you questioning how well we really know even the most celebrated leaders among us. And trust me, you won't want to miss a single moment. Before the tragedy, before the rumors, before the heartache, there was a love story that many admired. Pastor Tim Rogers and his late wife, Sarah, were seen as the picture of unity, faith, and devotion. They met long before fame touched his life, when both were simply two young dreamers trying to live out God's plan. Sarah, a vibrant young woman with a radiant smile and a heart full of compassion, was the yin to Tim's yang. Where Tim was fiery and charismatic, Sarah was calm and grounded. Their relationship became a testimony in itself. Tim often spoke about how Sarah was his rock, the one who stood by him during the rough early days of ministry when the churches were small, and the offerings barely paid the bills. She was there through the doubts, the criticism, and the heavy burden of leadership. She'd spend hours volunteering at the local soup kitchen, always putting others before herself. She tutored underprivileged children after school and organized donation drives for the homeless. Her kindness touched countless lives. In many sermons, Pastor Tim would smile warmly as he talked about her. He shared stories of their long conversations, her prayers over him before he stepped on stage, and her unwavering belief that he was destined for greatness. Sarah, he'd often say, his voice thick with emotion, is the reason I am who I am today. She is the embodiment of grace and faith. Their marriage wasn't perfect, no marriage is, but it was real, grounded, and deeply rooted in their shared faith. For years, fans and church members alike saw their bond as proof that true love, based on God's foundation, could survive anything. They raised a beautiful family together, built ministries side by side, and weathered the storms of life with a kind of strength that seemed almost unshakable. Their family was the heart of the church, their children active in youth groups and community outreach. Every Sunday, the Rogers family radiated joy and warmth, a shining example of faith in action. But here's where it gets heartbreaking. Despite all the public smiles and private prayers, there were silent battles happening behind closed doors that most people never knew about. Battles that would soon come to the surface in the most painful way possible. And this is just the beginning of where the story takes a darker turn. While the world saw a strong, happy couple smiling on stage, the truth behind the scenes was far more complicated. Friends close to the Rogers family later revealed that Sarah had been silently battling health issues for years. But only a very tight circle knew just how serious things were. She was a woman of immense strength, never wanting to burden others with her pain. She kept serving, kept smiling, kept showing up for her family, her husband, and their ministry, even on days when she was barely holding herself together. Behind the radiant glow that people admired was a woman struggling with physical exhaustion, emotional turmoil, and private moments of despair. Some say she would pray for hours alone, asking God for strength, not just for herself, but for Tim, to keep him covered in prayer while she quietly suffered in silence. The pressure of maintaining appearances, both as the wife of a public figure and as a woman of faith, weighed heavily on her. There were times when her body was crying out for rest, but the demands of ministry and public life offered little room for pause. The congregation depended on her. Tim depended on her. Their children looked up to her. So, she pushed through. She participated in every church event, organized countless fundraisers, and even started a support group for women battling chronic illnesses, all while silently enduring her own pain. But here's where the story starts to shift dramatically. Rumors began swirling among church members. Whispers in the pews hinted that something wasn't right. People noticed her absences at key events. They noticed the forced smiles. They noticed how Pastor Tim, once always energized and joyful, began to seem different, tired, distracted, burdened. Behind closed doors, the family was grappling with decisions no family ever wants to face. Doctors' visits became more frequent. Prayer requests became more desperate. Faith was tested in ways they never imagined. Sarah tried alternative therapies, consulted specialists across the country, and even made a pilgrimage to a holy site, desperate for a miracle. But the public? They still didn't know. The Rogers family kept it quiet. They hoped. They prayed. They fought. They believed that somehow, someway, this storm would pass. Yet, fate, as we all know, can be cruel. And just when it seemed like things might turn around, just when it seemed like healing might finally come, destiny delivered a crushing blow. No one was ready for it. Stay with me because the next part of this story will truly break your heart. It was a Sunday morning like any other. Pastor Tim Rogers had just delivered one of his most powerful sermons yet, a message about faith, about perseverance, about trusting God even when the road gets dark. The congregation was moved. Some wept. Others shouted "Amen" from the pews. But what they didn't know was that as Pastor Tim stood behind the pulpit proclaiming hope and healing, his own world was quietly collapsing. He spoke of overcoming obstacles, never mentioning the immense weight he was secretly carrying. After service, close friends say Tim rushed out of the church faster than usual. No meet and greet. No lingering handshakes. No smiling selfies with church members. Something was wrong. The sparkle in his eyes was gone, replaced by an urgent fear. When he arrived home, the atmosphere was heavy. Family members were gathered, their faces etched with worry. His wife, Sarah, the woman who had been his rock, his partner in life and ministry, was lying in bed, her body frail, her spirit fighting but fading. Tim knelt beside her, holding her hand, praying fervently. He whispered words of encouragement, of love, of faith. He promised her that she wasn't alone, that God was with them. He begged for a miracle, even as the room filled with the undeniable reality that the end was near. Friends and family recall how Sarah, in one of her last lucid moments, squeezed his hand gently. She managed a soft smile, a smile that seemed to carry 1,000 words. Love, gratitude, peace, and farewell. And then, quietly, gracefully, she slipped away. The woman who had carried so much, who'd been the pillar behind the pastor, the mother behind the family, the silent warrior behind the ministry, was gone. Pastor Tim Rogers was devastated. In an instant, the man who had spent his life comforting others now needed comforting himself. He was utterly shattered, a shell of his former self. But here's where it gets even heavier. He didn't immediately tell the church. He didn't rush to social media. He didn't call a press conference. Instead, he withdrew into silence. Days turned into weeks. Public appearances were canceled. Social media pages went quiet. Church members speculated. Rumors exploded. Some said it was a sudden illness. Others whispered about deeper struggles no one knew about. And all the while, Tim was battling a private storm of grief, guilt, and questions. Why her? Why now? Why after all the faith they had shown? He wasn't just grieving the loss of his wife, he was grieving the loss of a future they had built together, the dreams they had yet to fulfill, the promises they had made. He was haunted by the unspoken words, the things left unsaid, the moments they would never share. And just when it seems like the weight of it all might crush him completely, Pastor Tim made a decision that shocked everyone. But before we get to that, you need to understand what led him to that life-changing choice. For weeks, Pastor Tim Rogers stayed silent. The weight of his grief kept him bound, unable to function, unable to even get out of bed. He was adrift in a sea of sorrow, questioning everything he had ever believed. But slowly, as the days turned to months, something inside him began to shift. He knew that he couldn't hide forever. He had to speak out, not only for himself, but for the congregation that had been anxiously waiting for answers. He was a man of God, but also a man of his own doubts, fears, and struggles. He had always been the one to offer comfort to others, to be the voice of reason in moments of crisis. Yet now, he was standing at the crossroads of his own sorrow. Could he continue to lead when the pain felt so overwhelming? Tim began to retreat more deeply into his faith. He spent hours in prayer and solitude, seeking solace in the scriptures that had always provided him with strength. He reread their wedding vows, listened to their favorite hymns, and pored over old photo albums, reliving cherished memories. Yet the questions lingered. Why had his wife been taken so soon? What was God's plan for him now? One night, after weeks of silence, he felt a pull, a call. It wasn't just a whisper, it was a loud, resounding voice that seemed to reverberate from the deepest parts of his soul. He knew what he had to do. The next morning, Pastor Tim called his closest confidants, people who had stood by him during the most difficult moments of his life. He asked them to meet him at the church, a place that had become so empty without his wife's presence. When they gathered, Tim stood before them, and for the first time in weeks, his voice was steady. His eyes, however, were filled with the pain of a man who had lost everything. He began to speak, but what he said wasn't just a confession of his own grief. He revealed something much deeper. Tim admitted that the death of his wife was not the only challenge he had been facing. He spoke of the dark moments he had experienced privately, the pressure of being a pastor, the responsibility of leading a growing church, the constant weight of expectation from his congregation and community. He revealed that the last few months had been filled with sleepless nights, questioning his calling, and even wondering if he was meant to continue this path. The burdens of the ministry had been immense, the constant demands and criticisms taking their toll. But then, in an unexpected twist, Tim revealed something no one saw coming. As he spoke, he mentioned a conversation he had with his wife just days before her passing, a conversation that would forever change the course of his ministry and his life. It wasn't just a conversation about the future or their dreams, it was a conversation about secrets. Sarah, in one of her final moments, had opened up to him in a way she never had before. She confessed things about their past, things that had been buried beneath the surface for years. And here's the shocking part. Those secrets were not just about their personal lives, they were about things that had been happening within the church, things that would raise eyebrows and set tongues wagging. Tim wasn't ready to reveal these things to the world, but the burden of carrying them alone was becoming too much to bear. He knew he had to make a choice, remain silent and live with the weight of these truths, or expose them and risk everything. So, he made the difficult decision to break his silence. Tim stood before his closest friends and confessed the secret Sarah had shared with him. He knew it would change everything. It would shake the very foundation of his ministry. But Tim, ever the man of faith, believed that truth had a way of freeing people, even when it hurt. But what were these secrets? What did Sarah reveal? And how would it impact his future? The suspense was unbearable. Stay with us because what happened next will leave you speechless, and it all revolves around the final days of his wife's life. With his closest friends around him, Pastor Tim Rogers now stood on the precipice of something far greater than his own personal grief. The room was heavy with anticipation, each word that came from Tim's mouth carrying the weight of both love and betrayal. His voice trembled, not from fear, but from the realization that the moment had arrived. He could no longer hide the truth. Tim paused for a moment, gathering himself. His eyes scanned the room, meeting the gazes of those who had walked beside him during this tumultuous journey. Each face mirrored the same mixture of concern, curiosity, and disbelief. How could a man of faith, a respected leader in the community, be hiding something so devastating? The conversation we had, Tim began slowly, his voice cracking under the weight of the confession. It wasn't just about our life together. It wasn't just about my ministry or our hopes for the future. It was something deeper. It was about things I never imagined I'd have to hear from my wife. A hush fell over the room as Tim continued. She told me things I wasn't prepared for. She admitted that our church, the ministry I had dedicated my entire life to, wasn't what it seemed. There were things happening behind closed doors. There were decisions I made that I now question. And those decisions, they affected not just our family, but the very community I swore to protect. Tim's voice faltered as he recalled the gravity of Sarah's confession. She spoke about financial choices, questionable investments made by church leadership. She mentioned deals and arrangements that were never disclosed to me. And then, she revealed something that shook me to the core. Someone close to me, someone I trusted, had been manipulating not just the finances, but the very direction of the church. The person I had worked alongside for years, trusted like a brother, had been hiding things from me. The room was silent. The people around him exchanged uneasy glances. Tim took a deep breath, pushing through the immense pain of reliving the moment. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to hear it. But she was so sure. And now, I can't ignore it. What she told me, it has to come to light. It has to be known, even if it destroys everything I've built. The room was thick with silence, the kind that grips your chest and refuses to let go. You could feel the tension pressing down like a storm waiting to break. Pastor Tim Rogers stood before the congregation, his voice trembling with a mix of grief, resolve, and something deeper. Truth long buried and now clawing its way to the surface. For weeks, Tim began, his voice rising with emotion, I've been battling whether to speak up. I've prayed, cried, and questioned everything I thought I knew. But I can't hold this in anymore. I can't carry this weight alone. My wife, my beautiful, loyal wife, lost her life because of this secret. And if I stay silent, her death will mean nothing." A hush fell across the room. Every eye was on him. His voice cracked, but he didn't break. Wiping away tears, Tim turned toward his most trusted ally, the man who had stood by him in every storm. "This isn't just about me or the church," Tim continued. "This is about trust, your trust. The trust of a congregation who believed in me, in this ministry. If I keep hiding the truth, then I'm no better than the ones who betrayed it." Then, with a deep breath, he delivered the first shock. "My wife told me something before she died. Something terrifying. The corruption inside this church runs deeper than any of us imagined. And now, I have no choice but to bring it to light. I won't let her death be for nothing." People in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away. Others stared straight ahead, bracing for impact. Tim stepped forward. But the most painful part? The betrayal didn't come from an outsider. It came from someone right beside me. Someone you all know. Someone I loved like a brother. A murmur rippled through the crowd. He paused, letting the weight of his words hang in the air. Then he said it. "I'm talking about my closest confidant. Pastor Michael Green." Gasps echoed through the sanctuary. Faces twisted in shock. Pastor Green? The man they'd seen pray, preach, and counsel with Tim for years? Tim's voice steadied, filled now with cold clarity. "I was blind. He manipulated me. Controlled the finances, pulled strings, and made decisions that served his ambitions, not our people. He even used my wife's death as a smokescreen, convincing me that everything was fine. But it wasn't." The room was frozen in disbelief. This man I trusted, this man we all trusted, was orchestrating everything from behind the scenes. And now I know, he's the reason my wife died surrounded by unanswered questions. The revelation wasn't just personal, it was devastating to the very foundation of the ministry. Every prayer, every act of service, every dollar donated now felt tainted. With tears in his eyes but strength in his voice, Tim made a vow. "I didn't want to see it. But now that I do, I have to speak the truth. I won't protect him anymore. I won't protect anyone who betrays our faith." He paused again. Then came the final, haunting question: can this ministry survive? Can I rebuild what was broken? Only time will tell. But Tim Rogers has taken the first step, by telling the truth. And that may be the most powerful sermon of all.